Oh, hi there! So, here is a video on the physical activity and your healthy mind and body. We will be looking at somatotypes, optimum weight, and then weight-related conditions, as well as risk assessments and preventing injuries. Please make sure you take notes. Those of you watching this before Monday, well done. Those of you who are leaving this to your last minute, look out, I will find out. Right, so somatotypes. There are 3 different body types, okay? We've got ectomorph, endomorph, and a mesomorph. We're going to look at ectomorph first. Now, an ectomorph characteristics are things like thin and lean. They are good at long distance events like a marathon runner or a high jumper, for example. Okay, now an endomorph. This is a body type that has a higher level of fat, okay? And often they're grouped in sports that need more power. So, for example, a sumo wrestler, or maybe a forward in rugby. The last body type, mesomorph, tend to be more muscular, okay, and they are involved in sports that require more strength and bursts of energy. So Usain Bolt, my friend from the last video, for example, would be a mesomorph, and he is a sprinter. You also get some rugby players and some footballers who tend to have broader shoulders and narrower hips, and they would fit into the mesomorph category. Now, obviously, there are 3 examples that are extreme. Okay, so they're typical sportsmen within those body types. Most people, so likes of you and me, would tend to be a mixture of those. So we're going to look at how we would measure our somatotype. Generally, they are marked out of 7. Okay, so you have a 2 out of 7 for your fatness, maybe a 6 out of 7 for your muscularity, and perhaps a 3 out of 7 for your thinness. You would then also look at recording your height and weight, and to take a measurement for your bone size, you would use something called a condyle, okay, and then your muscle girth can be measured using a tape measure, and that was done normally around your biceps and your gastrocnemius. And then for your body composition, you would look at using skin fold calipers, okay, that would tell you your fat content, and then you could plot all your results on a chart. That's called a somatotype chart. So if you were to have a thrower, for example, in athletics, they would probably be a mixture of a couple of different body types. So generally they'd have mesomorphic qualities, but also endomorph qualities. They would be, a little bit on the fat side, per se. So they would be known as mesomorphic endomorphs. Okay, so you need to be able to know the different terms when they fall between the lines. You could also have a mesomorphic ectomorph, okay, where they've got muscular, but they're also thin as well. Now, sometimes people break the trend and can be a different somatotype for a sport, and that's okay. It just depends on that person, and they might make up for their body type in skills instead. So that moves us on to optimum weight. So what is optimum weight? It's mainly known as the most favourable or the best compromise, okay, for that sport. So the most desirable weight a player can perform at. That brings us on to factors that can affect your optimum weight. There are 4. You've got gender, bone structure, muscle girth, and genetics. So gender, obviously males tend to have more muscle mass and weigh more. This gives men a strength advantage. This is why obviously they are slightly faster than us at sprinting and rowing as well. They've got a bit more power. So that's why we have single-sex sports. As well as this, some sports like boxing have different weight categories. It would be unfair, for example, if Jess Ennis competed against men. Let's be honest, she probably would beat them though. Moving on to bone structure, the second element that can affect weight. Some people have longer and wider bones. Some people are taller than others. They'll have a greater bone density, which will mean they weigh more, which is natural. Sometimes that can be affected by genetics as well. You could be the same height, but weigh different based on your bone density. Bone structure is important in many contact sports. For example, rugby. Obviously, the higher bone density you have and the stronger your bones, the less likely you are to break one. The third element is muscle girth. So muscle girth is the size of your muscles. People with bigger muscles will obviously weigh more because muscle weighs more than fat. Big muscles are an advantage in sports needing power, so sprinting, throwing, rowing, all those kind of things. Throwing events like javelin need good muscle strength, so they need muscles. And bigger muscles will equal a natural advantage. It's also linked into body shape, so some people with different heights okay, will have a slightly different muscle girth, okay, and you will know this if you get your body composition measured. You'll be able to tell how much muscle you have to how much fat. Lastly, that brings us on to genetics. So body composition can be passed on, okay, by both your parents, and body shape and weight can transfer from parent to child. So it might be that you get most of your genes from your dad or from your mum, and then that will have an impact on your body type and your weight as well, okay. So this will then affect your sports. So optimum weight in sports, obviously it can differ from different individuals, and it also differs depending on the sport. So an optimum weight in rugby wouldn't be an optimum weight in athletics or football. So it really does depend on your sport. It can also then depend on your position. A goalkeeper's optimum weight would be different to a centre-back's, for example. Note down some examples that you can think of, and then maybe you can use those examples in your exam. Okay, the last thing I'm going to look at is how to lose weight. Okay, so some sports might require people to lose weight. So what can you think of that might do that? And how might we lose weight? Here is an example of an energy balance equation. Now, decreasing calorie intake will help you lose weight. Okay, that's known as dieting. Increasing your calorie expenditure, which is how many calories you burn, will also help you lose weight. If you do both, that will obviously have a bigger impact. If your calorie intake is higher than your calorie expenditure, then you're likely to put on weight. So you need to be able to explain this if you get asked it in your exam. Right, moving on to the weight-related conditions. There are 5 of them, okay? I remember this by the alphabet. The vowels in the alphabet are A, E, I, O, U. Now remember this, the 5 of them are A, O, 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 U. That might help you remember, a little tip for you. So, anorexia. Definition is pertaining to anorexia, a prolonged eating disorder due to the loss of appetite. You need to know that definition. It can obviously be very dangerous, can lead to extreme weight loss, it can lead to psychological problems as well, and its effect on sport, obviously it can get very, very dangerous to play sport because your heart actually can't cope with the amount of pressure that gets put on it. This will lead to your performance not being as good, they won't be able to perform at their best, and their body will really they'll be exhausted from not being able to compete at the right level. Going from one extreme to the other, we now have being obese. Now, the definition of obese is a term used to describe people who are very over fat. And as you know, it's on the rise in the UK, it's always increasing, carries considerable disease risks, okay, unlikely to be able to sustain physical activity. They won't be able to keep going as long as somebody who is at an optimum weight, and they will generally exercise to try and tackle obesity. Moving on to over fat. The definition of this is having body fat in excess of normal. Okay, someone who is overweight with a high fat content, it can differ depending on circumstances. So if you look at BMI, some people who do a lot of sport and are very muscular, sometimes they'll measure their BMI and they'll be overweight or over fat, which isn't necessarily correct. They won't have as high a fat content as someone who does fall into that category normally, and they actually have just heavier muscles instead. Okay, overweight. The definition for overweight is having weight in excess of normal. So it's not harmful unless accompanied by overfatness. So it's, one step above the optimum weight. Sometimes there could be medical reasons for someone to be overweight. Maybe you can get thyroid problems where they've got an underactive thyroid, so they don't burn as many calories as they normally would. Generally, they'll be consuming more calories than they will be expending, and they will have a higher body weight, and it could be due to a higher muscle mass. And sometimes it could even be beneficial to be overweight as a sports person, because it will mean that you have more muscle mass, which will mean you'll have more power or more strength. Okay, so wrestlers, javelin throwers, or shot putters, rugby players will probably often be classed as overweight, but they won't have the fat content there. Lastly, we have underweight. The definition is weighing less than normal, healthy, or injured. Okay, so generally it can have a massive effect on performance. It could be very negative. Some people who become obsessed with exercise will often be underweight. Some sports have weight categories, so jockeys or judo players, boxers for example, they might be required to lose weight and be a lower weight to perform in their sport. Okay, that's obviously extreme examples. And they might take things like diuretics to help them, or often use fluid intake, so they'll drink less water for a weigh-in, for example. Okay, the final topic for today, we look at risk assessment and preventing injuries. What are the main risks? So we've got warming up and cooling down, equipment and facilities, protective equipment and clothing, balanced competition, playing to the rules, and physical readiness. So warming up and cooling down. Why do we need to do this? Well, the warm-up needs to prepare the muscles, okay? It helps prevent injuries, gets your blood pumping around your muscles and making sure that you're not going to pull something. Cooling down will help get rid of lactic acid and prevent soreness and achiness the next day. Checking equipment and facilities. So generally this is the job of the organisers or the officials, or sometimes both. They are needed to make sure the area is safe and secure. And obviously, depending on the sport, it will vary. The procedures will vary. So football, the referee will do a pitch inspection before the game. And in any event or that people organise, there will always be a risk assessment done to make sure that they can cover themselves and minimise those risks. Moving on to protective equipment and clothing. This is kind of self-explanatory really, and these are needed, okay, in a lot of activities to stop injuries. So it can vary according to the sport. In hockey you have a goalkeeper, they'll be kitted up, so different position will make a difference to it. So you have shin pads in football, helmets in American football, okay. Obviously in lots of rules as well, there are things that you're not allowed to wear. Jewellery, for example, is a big one. This can have a massive impact on some sports. And having the correct footwear. If you've got the wrong footwear, then it can actually cause you injuries. So if you pronate or supinate, so you run on the outside of the inside of your feet, then it's going to have a massive impact on your knees and your hips as well. So footwear is a good example to use if it crops up in your exams. Runners will have special running shoes. Athletics or athletes will have spikes, football boots or rugby boots. Okay, these are all things that you need to be able to make examples of and say why they are needed. Balanced competition can be split into 4 different things. So you've got weight categories, mixed or single sex, age, and obviously you can have handicap systems. So balanced competition in terms of weight categories, if there's someone heavier than somebody else in boxing, it's a bit of an unfair advantage, so they categorise them depending on weight. Obviously most sports are split in either single sex or mixed, so you get mixed badminton or mixed doubles for table tennis, that kind of thing, and tennis, but in football, hockey, rugby, netball, generally they are single sex. Now age is obviously a bit of a sensitive one. It can be quite controversial, but obviously you can't have somebody under 16 playing against an adult because it's just not fair, and it could cause injuries and it could affect insurance and those kind of things. And then in things like golf, okay, sometimes they use a handicap system, so if there's somebody much better and much more experienced, they might have a lower handicap than somebody who isn't as experienced, and they might get extra shots taken off because of that. Okay, so playing to the rules, obviously they are there for a reason, to help promote fair competition. There are sanctions for breaking rules, and this differs depending on which sport you are. Sometimes there are professional fouls. You see it in football, you see it in basketball, and it is basically just to promote fair play all round, and there are often rewards for the team with the best fair play. Okay, and the last factor that will affect risk assessments and preventing injuries is the physical activity readiness questionnaire. You should be familiar with this because you'll have all done it for your PEP. Okay, so here we are at the end of the video. You can stop listening to me drone on about stuff now. Please make sure you've got some notes and make sure that you bring them to the lesson along with your folder. So we have looked at somatotypes, different body shapes, weight-related conditions, okay, and things that can affect these, and risk assessment and preventing injuries. So you'll be taking part in a few different games, so make sure you come prepared to have some competition with each other. Over and out.